Hello and welcome to another episode of Rewildology, the show that explores conservation, travel, and rewilding the planet. I'm your host, Brooke Mitchell-Norman, conservation biologist and adventure traveler. It's been a hot second since I've released a bonus episode for you all, and I thought now was a great time to share a special interview that I did with episode 48 guest Stotra Chakrabarti, PhD, for his conservation class at Macalester College. Stotra loved my unconventional approach to conservation and invited me to speak about why I went to such lengths to create a podcast from scratch. He asked me several questions about my story, the journey that led to launching Rewildology, and advice for anyone else considering going outside of the confines of academia or their current bubble to pave their own path in this field. We recorded this conversation in December 2021, just before Rewildology's first birthday in January. The podcast had recently hit some big milestones, and it's crazy to see how much it's grown from there. All right, friends, without further ado, here is this manifesto-esque, yes, I just made up a word, conversation all about Rewildology with Stotra and me. Enjoy!
Hi, everyone. This is a very special moment because, first of all, I think this is my first time I'm doing this, that I am chatting with someone and recording it and putting it out there as a resource to be used for my conservation course, which is Conservation in the Anthropocene. But this recording will also be part of the resource which would be available to the entire Macalester community and outside, so that anyone who's interested in and thinking about an absolutely unconventional way, or basically quote unquote unconventional way of doing conservation per se, can tune in, be inspired, and listen to this so that they can have their own notes to go about doing something fascinating beyond the traditional academia per se. So thank you for tuning in. So today I am chatting with the fantastic Brooke Norman, and I'm gonna take a moment to introduce Brooke. It's a fascinating introduction, whatever she has achieved and accomplished till now. Well, it's, I think, is beyond brilliant. So without spending more time, let me introduce you to Brooke. So Brooke is a conservation biologist, which is why we are chatting today. She's a travel addict and an admirer of all things wild, which I think, since you perhaps are listening to this show or to this recording, would be interested in, or that's the part that resonates with most of us. Her globetrotting has taken her to the bushes of Africa, the jungles of India, the pristine Galapagos Islands. I'm jealous, very jealous. Polar bears in the frozen tundra. I'm jealous times two. And I know she just came back from Costa Rica. I'm jealous times three. So, so she has visited these places, learned about their communities, and talked to people who work with conservation and with wildlife in these areas. And she is basically she began her podcast series Rewildology to share stories from the incredible people that she has come across in these places, the good, the bad, and the hilarious, of course. And she talks about them through her conservation podcast, which she mentions that it's a conservation and travel experience. If you care, she has a bachelor's degree in zoology from the Ohio State University and a master's degree in conservation biology from Miami University's Global Field Program. Um, I personally know Brooke because I was on the seat where she is today, where I was chatting with her about Asiatic lions. Um a few weeks back, or perhaps a month back, and since then we have been talking about different things. And I am phenomenally inspired by what Brooke does, because I think this is something. I think using such media or using such mediums to develop conservation is the only way forward. And so today I would be talking with her about what got her interested in doing this, and how people who are listening to this particular recorded session can use this to develop their own. So thank you, Brooke, for chatting with me. And by the way, I'm pretty sure that everyone can figure out that I'm superbly nervous. Not just that this is the first time doing this, but also it's very difficult for like doing this with a professional podcaster who does this all the time. So I hope please apologize if I sort of you know go wayward, stutter somewhere, but that's all because I am thoroughly kind of happy nervous about doing this. So thank you, Brooke, for joining me today. So let's begin with knowing, like, what's your story? Like, we all have these conservation stories that we have listened to these conservation stories that you put forward about these fascinating people. But it would be fantastic to know what's your story and how you got into doing this. Um,
Absolutely. Stotra, thank you so much for inviting me on. And of course, when you reached out and had the idea for this podcast chat, of course, I was like, yeah, let's do this. This is going to be so much fun. So again, thank you. Thank you. And it's just like you said, it's interesting being in this seat versus your seat. So yeah, my story. I grew up in the Appalachians, middle of nowhere. Used to have a pretty thick accent for anybody who's been to that part of the world. If you think of like West Virginia and Eastern Kentucky, that's pretty much where I grew up. So the beautiful rolling hills of Appalachia. With that, I wasn't exposed to much. The only thing that I saw when it came to wildlife or conservation was being a veterinarian. And then, of course, watching as many wildlife documentaries as I could growing up. I mean, I have 3 sisters, so it was whenever I was allowed to have the remote for a little amount of time that I could watch some of these awesome documentaries, and just seeing lions in the Serengeti and these places that I thought at the time I had no idea if I would ever see in my actual life. Because my parents, I mean, they always made sure that we had enough, but we never had excess, in other words. So I come from a very blue collar family, and my parents sacrificed a lot to give us girls everything that we had. And I'm insanely grateful for what they did. But with that, I was, like I said, I just wasn't exposed to much. And so I was like, okay, what can I do to save wildlife? I know veterinarian. So that's the path I pursued. So I went to Ohio State University because I grew up a big football fan. And Ohio State was the only option, which, looking back, that was kind of stupid because I probably could have gotten a full ride somewhere else, but whatever. It's like, Ohio State's it. It's my only option. It's the only school I applied for. Again, not smart, but I was stubborn. And so I was like, okay, great. I'm going to become a zoological veterinarian. And that is the path I went down. I went down it hard, Stotra. I was a pre-vet. I studied zoology. I tried to have the highest GPA I could, completely crushed myself because I just had that standard that I held myself to. And then after that, so I kind of had this, I guess you can call it, come to Jesus meaning. I don't know what else you want to call it. This awakening my senior year, where I realized that, I don't know if this is for me. I started working at the Columbus Zoo at the time. And that was the first time in my life I was employed for me being me. I was hired on guest engagement. And this was the first time I was like, oh my gosh, my personality has a meaning. It's more than just my academic prowess, I guess you can say, because I was really good in school. And I was engaging with people, completely revamped the guest engagement team. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so much fun. And then I really started to question my path, which was insanely frightening. By this point, I was a senior and I had already started to apply to vet school. I mean, I was going down the path. Like I had this one vision and I was going to do it. And so when it started to shake, I was scared out of my mind. And so I applied, and then I got in for an interview, and I was thankfully partnered with the two worst interviewees I could have, or interviewers that I could have ever been partnered with. They were two pathological veterinarians. And so they were in the, just looking in microscopes all day, studying parasites and all kinds of different diseases of animals. The biggest personality clashes of all time. And thank God, because I pretty much ran out of that room screaming, no, absolutely not. I cannot do this. I'm not going to do this anymore. So this was December of 2013, because I graduated in 2014. And I called my dad and I was like, Dad, I don't want to do this. And he's like, about time you realize this. I never saw you sticking, like what he said. He's like, I never saw you sticking shots in tigers' butts for your living. Like, I was like, okay, great. And so then I just kept going down this journey. I always knew that I wanted to do something post undergrad. And I luckily found my program, which was the Global Field Program, which is a master's program based out of Miami University, which you said in the introduction. So thank you for that. And this is the first program that I found where I could finally start traveling. At this point, I had barely been outside of Tennessee, and that's 2 states away from Ohio. And I always had these big dreams. I've always been this adventurous, wanderlust spirit. And I was like, okay, finally, I could travel with my graduate program. Oh my gosh, let me apply. And I didn't find this program until, I don't know, like 2 weeks before the deadline to apply. So I hurry up and whipped an application together and just went for it. And I got in. And I was like, oh my gosh, here we go. Now I'm in grad school. We'll see what comes out of this. And so then I finally started to travel, and I really started to experiment on what I wanted to do in the world of conservation. And through that program, so unlike a thesis, like a classic thesis program, master's thesis program or PhD, what we had to do was a portfolio of projects, and you have a master plan is what you call. So essentially I made my mission statement, and then all of the projects that I did were underneath the umbrella of my mission statement. And then instead of defending a thesis, what I did is I had to submit my master plan, and then the committee would decide if I had reached it or not. And luckily they did. So what I studied was how to use different forms of like education. So that's what I did. So I looked at a ton of different things. And that is when I really started to see all the different avenues that there is out there for engaging people in conservation. Because before too, I was really exposed to academia. I was in the zoo world at this time. And then what I found is, since big cats were my thing, which, as you know very well, are some of those conflict-ridden groups of animals there are, one of the biggest saviors, I guess you can say, or conservation programs, or whatever you want to call it, is sustainable travel. And that is when I discovered it during my program. And I'm like, oh my God, this is my calling. I need to come. This is the career path that I need to pursue, is I want to do conservation travel. Again, I had been to maybe 2 countries outside of the US by this point. So I went to Namibia for cheetahs as part of my program. I went to Baja, California, and then eventually India. And that was my last trip. I went to like the Western Ghats and the Southern Indian regions. Saw my first tiger, cried. It was glorious. It was wonderful. One of the best moments of my life. But this is what
I can totally,
right? You would know.
I can totally see that. Absolutely.
Bawled my eyes out.
Yeah, but funny thing is, I've not seen it. Like, I don't think I've seen a tiger in the Western Ghats. I've mostly seen in Central India. So
They
super,
weren't
super jealous.
right.
Super
This
jealous.
wasn't in the Western Ghats that I saw them. I saw it down in Bandipur, Nagarhole. So I saw them in more the southern region. But I was
Yeah,
there.
but it's also part of the whole complex, which is like Nagrole, and yeah. So not seen there. I've been
Yeah,
there,
right.
but
Crazy.
you do have a like a flair about seeing like very rare things. But yeah, sorry, continue.
No,
Just
yeah.
I just got teleported to that whole system for a while. But yeah, please.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I was
Yep.
insanely lucky. I was insanely lucky. Yeah. So after that, and that is when I was like, oh my God, I absolutely need to go into conservation travel. That is what I need to do. I don't necessarily need to be working directly with these cats. I need to be inspiring people to go see them and place their dollar on seeing them, because then they're going to be conserved, because there is a financial reason to keep these animals alive and thriving. I'm like, okay, that is where I need to spend my time. And so at this point, I was living in Colorado, so I moved around a couple times, and there was this company here called Natural Habitat Adventures, and they are one of the supreme conservation travel companies there are in the world. And I was like, okay, you all are going to hire me. I don't know when or how or whatever, but you're going to hire me. So I applied for 3 different roles, and the third role, when I was being interviewed, she's like, there's actually this new position that we're going to be rolling out. Why don't you go for that one? So it was technically the fourth role that I finally got at NatHab, and my career sprung. And so that is when I started to work for them. I worked my way up. Again, I had almost no travel experience, but I was enthusiastic as all get out, and helped restructure the company. We put this brand new adventure concierge center department in the middle of everything. And then I started to work heavily on the conservation side, which is really exciting. And then also a little nugget that eventually became the podcast, I had no idea at the time, is I hosted these things called conservation coffee talks, where once a month I had an expert come in and present about whatever it is that they were an expert in. And also some people within the company, they would present about whatever they were curious about, or a lot of them were also conservation biologists or guides or something, and they would also speak about it. So I hosted those for 2 years, and then COVID hit.
Yeah.
And
It
we
did.
all know what happened to the
What happened?
conservation world, what
Yep.
happened to travel, what happened
Yep.
to everything when COVID hit. And so my entire department was cut. And I didn't realize how much of my identity and my self-worth I had put into that role until I lost it. And I was lost for a little bit. And it didn't help that there was no conservation jobs to get after this
Right.
either. So,
Absolutely.
but I went home, had about 3 or 4 glasses of wine. And then the next day I put on my big girl pants and I started applying for jobs. I was like, okay, well, the skills that I do have, what role can I get? And I found a job at a startup here in Denver, and they needed a customer success manager. And I'm like, well, I'm good with people. That's one thing that's applicable across industries. So
Absolutely.
they hired me on for that, and just built their company as much as I could. But there was a big missing hole, there was a big missing piece of me. I was not working in conservation in any way because I couldn't. And then I watched that, I'm sure you've seen it, the latest documentary with David Attenborough, his like big witness statement one, where it's like a life on this planet or a life on
Yep.
planet Earth. I don't
Yep.
remember the name of it.
Yep.
And I bawled my freaking eyes out. And I'm
Yeah.
not an emotional person. I really am not an emotional person. But I lost it. And I looked over at my husband and I'm just like, what am I doing? What am I doing? And I had already had a little bit of a nugget of starting this podcast. I love podcasts. I listen to a podcast every single day, but I never found one in the nature genre that interested me. And not that there's not good ones out there. It's just I hadn't found the one that I was looking for. And so I had already been kind of thinking about it. I was like, maybe one day I could do a podcast, but I'm a biologist. I'm a scientist. I'm not a podcast host. I'm not an audio engineer. I'm not any of these things. But after watching that, I was like, I got to do this. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I'm going to figure it out, and I'm going to do it. So the next day, I messaged my boss. I was like, I'm going to go down to part-time. You need me to anyways, because they were going to the slow season and they were a startup. And so, if the goods are, the highs are high and the lows are low when you're in a startup. And I was like, so you need me to go to part-time anyways, and I'm going to launch this podcast. And I did. And so this was almost a year ago today, essentially. I started my first round of interviews in December of 2020, and I launched in January 26th of 2021. And last week, the podcast hit 10,000 downloads, which is still can't believe that.
Happy anniversary, and you have done
Yeah.
stupendously well. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's like,
Still can't believe it. Still can't believe it. I've met the most inspiring people that I still to this day cannot believe that I've had the opportunity to talk to them. I'm now doing my second travel series on Costa Rica. My first one was on Nepal. I'm getting ready to release episode 54 in
mhm.
2 or 3 days, which is nuts. And so, yeah, that's my journey, I guess, in a quick nutshell.
Whoa. That journey took us from the United States of America to India to Africa to Costa Rica and to a lot of places and people that you have connected with. So I, as as a person, like I personally am really, really enthused and like really curious about how did you like I got like I totally hear it screaming out of you that passion was the fuel that drove you through all of that, because I'm pretty sure that like redefining yourself, breaking yourself down, bringing back to like being in terms of unemployment, getting out of it, crushing it in the bigger circle, doing conservation again, bringing thinking out of the box, that needs a lot of courage and bravery, and I totally get it that we can run out of steam. I do most of the times, but you have done it gracefully and successfully. But also, I'm very curious about how did you come to naming your podcast Rewildology? Because I totally get it that that's the essence of it, like rewilding the planet. But this is such a great mixture of like this is like the science of rewilding, or the study of rewilding, if I can think about it in the Latin words. But and then you have this really funky hippie, like the entire portrait of like reaching out to the audience, which I believe is brilliant. So I just want to know that how did you come to this particular um, you know like name for your podcast series?
Yeah. I wish I could say that it all came to me in a flash of light and it was one try, and it trust me, it was not in any way, shape, or form. I'm awful at naming anything. For example, growing up, I didn't even name my baby dolls. They didn't even have names. Like, I'm the worst at naming stuff. And so, honestly, naming the podcast was much harder. This might have been the hardest part of all of it, to be honest with you. And I mean, I had like 3 or 4 interviews under my belt, and I still didn't have a freaking name on this thing. And so I still didn't. So what I did is I rewatched David Attenborough's documentary with the intent of getting inspired for a name. And I think I was traveling or something, and I like have my notebook out, and I was in an airport, and I'm rewatching it, and I'm like writing down notes, and I'm taking down keywords. Because one thing I did do is I wrote down a set of keywords that I didn't want to be in it. And
Right.
those keywords were your stereotypical ones. Those are that are like, go to a podcast list or go to a book list or just go to somewhere, and all of the words that they used in it, I didn't want to use. Because this podcast, I was like, this is going to be completely different than anything that is out there. And so it needs a name that is not like anything that's out there. And so I sat down and I was writing down all of these keywords in this documentary, and he kept saying rewild. I'm like,
Yeah.
ooh,
Yes.
I like
Yes.
that. I was like, I like that. I like that rewild. So I started. And then I went online, and there's this website called like Business Name Generator or something like that. And
Ooh.
so I just put in rewild, and then there's like a million different things that pops up. And one of the first ones that I was going to do was called Wildology instead of
Mm.
rewild, but Wildology. apparently that's a dog food brand. So I was like, not that, but I'm like, what about Rewildology? And so this is another big thing too. If anybody's going to create anything, do your research. So
Yeah.
I Googled it. I went to the US Trademark Association thing, Mabob, whatever that website is.
Yeah.
I did everything that I could. I did all the due diligence that I possibly could to make sure that no one already had that name. And ding, 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 Rewildology did not exist in the ethers of the internet. So I made up a word and I made up the title.
And it's a
And
success.
yeah, and it is.
Like it's
And
big.
everyone's just, yeah, everyone's like, oh my gosh, I absolutely love that name. And they always have the same thing
Yeah.
too. They're like, how'd you come up with it? I'm like, well, it was not a graceful story, but it worked out in the end. And then also too, it took me to the logo. I get a lot of compliments on the logo.
Yeah.
Again, I didn't want it to be just the standard brown, green, and blue. I'm like, every single other nature podcast is brown, green, and blue. And while that might be on brand, I wanted, if somebody is scrolling through podcasts, what is going to catch their eye? And that is what I wanted. So this is actually my third logo. It took me 3
Mhm.
tries to come up with this one. And then it was my last artist. I found him on Fiverr.
Mhm.
So, because I didn't do that. I did not do that at all. I just sent him some of my ideas and he came up with my logo.
Wow.
And that's my husband. When I opened up the I what do you call it? The mock-ups of whatever of the first time. I ran around my apartment like a freaking kid on Christmas morning. I was like, oh my God, babe, look at this logo. This is unbelievable. And that was it. So I finally had my logo and I finally had my name. And then I launched it a couple weeks later after that. And then of course I got to get a website and blah, blah, blah. I had to build a website and everything. But yeah, so that's how those came to be.
Oh, that's inspirational. I'm sure that's the right mix of, what would I say, inspiration, passion, luck, and so that's all coming together. And if anyone who's listening might be thinking about what's the logo about, what's the name of the podcast, I would attach link to the site of Brooke's podcast series, and you can go in and see how fantastic that logo is, because that's the first thing that I saw
Here, I have it right here.
when yeah, that's it.
There.
See,
That's
that's
right
how
here. It's on
concrete
my,
it is. I was like, wow. And you have to
yeah.
go check out the Instagram page, the Twitter page, and the website, because it's just, I think it's the new generation statement for conservation, because all that brown, boring, green things are done with. That's great. I'm not saying that we don't have, but I think moving forward, this is what we are trying to achieve, because at the end of the day, it's people who are right now, who are in our, like, the early career systems, are gonna inherit what's bad and difficult in the world right now. So it's our turn, I guess, or people like Brooke, whose turn it is to show like where we can reach with this entire redefined, vibrant, and new ways of looking at conservation. So bringing that thought together, I just wanted to know that, like, I'm pretty, like, as you mentioned, that conservation travel. I'm sure this is like a buzzword that we have been chatting about, and I'm pretty sure there are lots of people who are like just going like, "Oh, you can travel for conservation? You can conserve for traveling?" And so I'm pretty sure they're just going like, "Whoa, that does that happen?" Because a lot of people love traveling, and more so because we have not been able to travel for a long time, and it's fantastic to travel for conservation. So if you would like to, like, I'm sure you've met these fantastic people and communities as you have moved across. Would you want to just quickly perhaps share a few inspirational, or like your highlights about like meeting people or meeting communities, or see, so that people might think about like what you exactly feels like when you travel, and do your conservation travel per se? That would be fantastic.
Yeah. So one of the biggest and best intersections that I love when I travel is I try to meet as many local people as possible. And because I know that if I'm meeting somebody local, especially if I'm supporting them financially, whether it's a naturalist guide, whether it's a restaurant, whether it's X, Y, or Z, if I know that I'm visiting them, then my dollars are directly supporting them. And they know that the only reason why I'm there is because of the wildlife. So there is financial incentive to keep it there. So there's so many places in the world where if there were no more tourists, they would be gone.
Yeah,
There is absolutely
absolutely.
no way on this planet the Serengeti would still be here if it was
Oh,
not for
absolutely.
tourist dollars.
Oh, absolutely.
Right?
Definitely.
Right.
Yep.
Right. And so that's my big focus. So of course, I'm a biologist. Wildlife is my absolute favorite thing in the whole wide world. So I'm going to these places to see that wildlife. And it's so funny. It's so funny, Stotra. Every single time I go, it's always the people that I completely fall in love with. I always have these, I bring my camera, I take these beautiful photos, and then it's always the people that I have stories about. I mean, like I was
Mhm.
just in Costa Rica and I went for on my birthday. We went to this wonderful cooking class and they took us a tour of their sustainable farm. And then there's a Costa Rican moonshine that we did shots of, and it was wonderful. And like that is the story that I'm going to tell the most about is
Yeah.
I mean, I have a tendency of finding the moonshine when I go places
Mm,
abroad, but again,
mm,
I hang out with the local people. I get to meet local
absolutely.
people, and that is when you get to see what a community is really about, what a
Yeah,
culture is really about. I mean, like
exactly.
this scarf came from Nepal. This is
I
my
was just gonna say that. I didn't want to. I didn't want to. Like I didn't want to like pry, but I'm like, whoa, that looks like something that I
mhm.
like perhaps might connect to. I'm like, yeah,
Yes,
but yeah,
yeah,
that's.
just
I'm
there's a
so glad you
subtle, it's
said
a
that.
subtle.
Yeah, I'm like, but anyway, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so yes, I travel in a very different way. So you are not going to see me at a big resort. And again, I don't want to what's the word? I don't want to guilt trip anybody for the way that they've
Yeah.
traveled in the past. And I don't want anyone to feel like they've done it wrong because even if somebody has gone to an area and maybe not have traveled the most sustainable way, at least you are putting your dollars into something that wasn't
Yeah,
consumptive in some other industry or something. Like
absolutely.
even if that even if that resort wasn't there, then the local people that they are able to employ wouldn't have a job and they might be doing something else instead. So I don't want to completely demonize other forms of travel, but this is
Hmm.
the way that I travel when I go abroad. And so it's always wildlife focused. And I try to meet as many people as possible in the community. And then also try to go to and support as many local businesses as I possibly can. I'm just sometimes in really remote places, so like that doesn't exist. But if I am, then go to the local restaurant or the local place and hire the local guide and everything. So that's how I like to travel.
That's amazing because that's a lot of capacity building right there. Because the way and I believe that I learned a lot interacting with you about conservation travel because I really did not have quite a bit of like what would I say? I was not educated enough about it, which you kindly educated me a bit. At least I started now reading about that this realm exists in a very different way than I actually thought. Because it's different when conservation biologists travel. It's different when you have to use that and portray to the world that this is the most sustainable way to do it. Like when you can connect with nature as well as the communities that are associated with it so that you can build capacity in a way which is sustainable. Super inspiring, Brooke. So I was wondering, like you got these people connected, and you bring out their stories about different conservation stories, and I'm sure that that has left you pretty much enriched, and that has also left the whole community very enriched. And I'm talking about the community that listens, the community that gets inspired, and the community who sort of takes these messages home. And young kids who want to be like, whoa, you know what? I listen. something about sloths today. I heard about sharks, and I heard about tigers in Nepal, and 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 I want to do that. So do you have a particular? So I'm asking this particular, what would I say, definite question, because I'm sure quite a few people out there who are listening would, and I know they have their own podcasts. They want to build their own podcast series. So do you have a particular, like, what would I say, selection criteria in which you sort of chart up, like, okay, these are the sort of stories that I want to bring to the community, bring to the audience? Or do you have that, or do you have, like, it's pretty random, or like the based on connections, or like how does it go? Because I'm pretty sure it's daunting to begin something so fresh and from the scratch. So if you could just touch upon that, that would be fantastic.
Yeah. So I would like to say that I have like a super defined process, but I don't. It's a mix of all the things you just said. So I started with my network.
Mm.
And luckily for me, I mean, I just turned 30 and I'm happy to admit that, because I finally feel like people can respect me because they're like, oh, you're 30 now. It's like, yeah, everything I just worked for the past freaking
30.
decade, I'm 30 now, so respect me. Anyways, yeah. So I started with my network,
Mm.
and no matter where you're at in your conservation sphere or journey or whatever, you already have a network. So
Yeah.
start there. Who is your best friend? Who is your mentor? Who is your professor, aka Stotra? Who is somebody in your direct sphere, in your like first circle sphere, that you can connect with to either come on as a guest, or who knows somebody that could be a guest? So that is where I started. So if you listen to my first, I don't know, 10, 15 episodes, most of those people are my really good friends because I was nervous as all get out. Just like you said, opening up. My very first guest was my mentor, and I call him my Colorado dad. His name is Bill Given, and he's now actually my boss, which is awesome. It's a whole different story. But so I started there, and the people that are the most close to me, that I know the most about, that I didn't have to just pick off Instagram or somewhere random, and started there. And then I got my confidence. I started to realize how to make good episodes, how to write interesting questions. And I got all the jitters out, all the butterflies were out. And so by this point, I'm like to episode 10, 15 or something like that. And then I started to ask people who they knew. It's like, so who do you know that I need to know?
Mm.
And that's pretty much how I found everybody else.
Wow.
It's very rare that I reach out to somebody on a complete blue. And that does
Mm.
happen. That does happen every once in a while. And if I don't hear back, or if whatever X, Y, or Z, for some reason they can't come on, I don't take it personally, because I mean, the podcast, my email, the Rewildology email, has received a ton of pitches that I don't even reply back to. Makes me feel good that they're pitching, but I was like, you don't know the show at all. That just no. And so I never take it personally when somebody's just like, that sounds great. Maybe sometime in the future.
Yeah.
But I always make sure that I have my docket full. So I'm always asking, I'm always connecting in as many ways as I possibly can, meet new people. And it's almost always through my network. And then one of the biggest things is I'm very cognizant of the diversity of guests I have on.
Right.
I'm very cognizant of this. And I mean, just for example, I will be completely transparent. I have realized that I have not had anyone that's Black, an African American or an African, or anybody that's of a darker skin tone on my podcast recently. And that really bothers me. And so I'm going out right now to change that. And so that is how diverse I want everybody to be on. I want as many voices as I possibly can. Even my last episode was kind of controversial. And I'm glad. I'm glad. Even my boss Bill came in the other day. He's like, okay, I'm not gonna cuss. But he's like, man, your last guest really made me mad. And I'm like, good. I'm glad. That means that I'm having a diverse group, of people on, a wide set of ideals on. I want every single idea to be on, because if, for example, with that last guest, if that is his view of conservation and he is using that view in representation of a whole group of ways of thinking, then that voice needs to be out there too, because we need to understand that as conservationists. We need to understand how everybody thinks in this field, because the more we understand, then the more we can come to solutions together, and the more we can find ways to conserve what we have left. And so,
Absolutely.
yeah, so it's
Wow.
a mix of, it's always through my network. It's a little bit of pitching, throwing random softballs into the ethers and
Mhm.
seeing what sticks.
Yeah.
And then being very cognizant of the diversity of people I have on. I think we're up to 15 countries now, 15 different
Wow.
countries represented on the podcast. And I would love that to get to the whole world by the time I'm done.
Wow.
And very cognizant of the number of women voices I have on. I will say that at first I was, so the very, very first name, oh, we're going back now. The very first name of this podcast was going to be Expedition Her, but like her. And it
Mhm.
was all going to be women in the field.
Right.
And because, of course, I wanted to get as many women voices out there as possible.
Absolutely.
And then I thought about it. I thought about this really hard, really hard. And then I'm like, you know what? Some of the most important people in my life, I wouldn't be able to have on or tell their story simply because they're the wrong gender.
Mhm.
And I was like, that goes against why I would have an all women podcast. Like, I want to have as many voices on as possible. So why am I limiting myself to one genitalia?
Yeah.
And so that is how I want.
Absolutely. Oh, I
Yeah.
love that. I so love that.
Yeah.
But yeah, absolutely. So yeah, so I'm so grateful that you mentioned this. And this is like, I think anybody who's listening to this right now should take note of what Brooke just mentioned, that conservation or doing conservation is so crucial to have all of these voices represented, all of these like thoughts to be taken care of, or at least heard. Because I think right now conservation has become so political, and right now I'm being very candid that it has really become so political that you have to take sides. Well, of course, but then it's a connected sphere, and as you rightly mentioned, if you do not listen to all of those voices, perhaps we are doing it wrong. It just cannot be that your way or my way or the highway. It just cannot. It has to be that level of, and that level of juxtaposition and listening out. So now, like, just a small little side question, like when you, I'm sure this has happened to you a few times, quite a few times, and will happen in the future, that when you listen to someone speak about something that they are talking about their side of the story about conservation, or which you probably in your ideology do not cater to or do not substantiate. How does that, like, how do you react to it? Like, what's your moral, like, association when you are being the host and doing this, but you're not, like, you don't probably substantiate or you know um, approve in your mind of those thoughts.
Right. Yes, and this past episode is a perfect example of that. One,
Sorry, I did not want to put you on a spot,
no,
but I
no, no,
felt that
no.
this would be
This is a
really
fantastic
cool to
question. This is a fantastic
for.
question, and I'm so glad you asked it, because it is very needed in our society today. One, I never get offended,
Hmm.
because what is there to be offended about? Why would I be offended that this guest, or whatever guest I have on, this is what they really view as the answer?
Right,
So who am I to judge them?
right,
And
absolutely.
they're making an insane amount of impact in
Hmm.
maybe a way that I wouldn't do it,
Hmm.
but they have made a tremendous shift for conservation. And probably through their message, they are reaching people that I would never have access to. So who am I to judge them? Normally, in one of these situations, they are answering a question of mine.
Mm,
And so I let them go. I just let them talk. I just let them talk through, because if they can explain their point from A to Z, then there's nothing for me to add. There's nothing for me
mm,
to say. And it's up to the listener to decide if they agree with whatever they said
mm,
or if they don't agree whatever they said. I
right.
am never going to argue on my podcast. And one of my episodes, it was really, really good. It was with a good friend of mine. She was in the like lobby conservation side of things.
Right.
And we did have a little bit, I don't want to say banter is the right word, more of like, she's like, I mean, one of the things she said, she's like, can I challenge you on that? And I'm like, yes, please. Like, please challenge me on that. And it's so funny because what she was challenging me on is like the exact opposite of what this other guest was talking about. It's just so funny. It's so funny that both of these people are on the same podcast and they are literally going to be further sides of the political spectrum. And both
Mm,
of them have been guests on my podcast. And both of them are making a difference for conservation, which is beautiful. Like, no one is ever going to hear me say on my podcast, please vote for this person or please vote for that person. I
mm,
don't want anyone to feel that way. I don't want to ostracize anybody for their political beliefs. I want everybody to feel welcome as they listen to my podcast. You are a rewildologist, is what I say. You are part of this
yeah.
community, and we need every single viewpoint that there is out there. So
Mm,
I don't care if, I mean, like, I will also say this too. I come from a very conservative place, a
mm,
very conservative place. And I am blessed that some of the closest people in my life are insanely conservative, and some of the closest people in my life are insanely liberal. And since
mm,
I am directly in the middle, I get to hear both of these conversations. And so I'm never pulled in one way or the other. And so oh my gosh, it is so valuable to have people in your life that have every single viewpoint you can possibly imagine, because it'll keep you in line with what everybody is saying, and you won't get in this like tribal social media bubble where everyone's screaming the same thing and you're like,
yeah.
wow, the other side isn't the enemy. They want the exact same thing that you do. We just
Right.
all think that maybe the solution's a little different. That's all.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just let them go. I let them talk, and I leave it to my audience to decide if they agree with that statement or if they don't. And I hope that they don't get too upset one way or the other, because if they get upset, then they're missing the point, if you
Yeah.
know what I mean.
Yeah.
And if
Totally.
they do get upset, then hopefully they reflect on it, on why they got upset. So yeah.
Yeah.
And I almost cut it out, but I was like, no, I can't. Cutting out his viewpoints right now, it goes against the whole reason why I have this podcast. So yeah.
Which is supremely, what would I say, elegant, because I think things that we all do, being conservationists, being associated with nature, is that diversity at its best, right? We have predators and prey. They are like two different parts of the spectrum, like on the same spectrum, but just completely at loggerheads. But still, it's like together. And I believe that if there are people who really are listening and trying to take notes about having their own podcast series, it's very crucial to be passionate, but also very, very impassionate about bringing these representations and thoughts out there, so that it it would serve more, as you said, it would serve better than actually just giving a very directional view to the whole thought process. That's fantastic. So I was also wondering, like thinking about or reading through, contemplating and reflecting about your journey, that you actually moved from like being hardcore in academia, or at least that was the thought process. And we know that academia still remains as one of the gatekeepers of conservation per se. But so now, and from there, you have moved on to more immediate, results based, and a very different sphere of doing conservation, and you're making a change. and I can endorse that. I'm like, I totally can. So I just want to know that, of course, I'm sure you reflect upon it and you feel satisfied about it. But where do you envisage that these out of the box thoughts, and it can be anything, not just doing conservation podcasts or conservation traveling, like different other thoughts. Where do you think that this fits into this entire larger, you know, gamut of doing or doing conservation in the modern world, in the world that's coming, not just academia, but all of this. So if you could reflect upon that, that would be fantastic for students and others who are listening.
Right. And I love that you bring that up because since you are in academia, and then of course anyone that is currently listening to this is also in academia, it's really easy to get the blinders on because you're so
Mhm.
entrenched in the moment. And
Oh, I have
sometimes
mine. I completely have mine. I had it. I'm like slowly. I'm like but anyway, yeah.
exactly.
Sorry. So sorry about that.
No, exactly. But and I used to be as well. I mean, I thought heavily about getting my PhD too.
Yeah.
And then I reflected on, okay, like what good for the greater good of conservation would getting my PhD do? Is essentially the question I had to ask myself. And then I found these other avenues of conservation and I'm like, wow, there are so many ways to make an impact. And honestly, I just followed my passions. And academia is just one way. Like that is just like it's just yes, it's vitally important to have academia
Yes.
because we need to have those research papers to help steer us because we need the science. We
Yeah.
need the science. Because if we don't have the science, then we are all just shooting in the dark. We at least need some sort of
Direction.
like
Some.
arrow
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
follow down, some northern
Yeah.
star to at least tell us what is actually going on. Okay, yes, we need the
Right.
science and we need to take action based in science.
Right.
So academia has a very prominent part in this, but there is still almost no way to get access to that information. I run into this all the time. So even though, I have multiple letters behind my name, I'm a scientist, all these things, there are still so many papers that I don't have access to because I'm not associated with an institution. I
Right.
I can't get the knowledge because there's a whole bunch of episodes that I want to put together that I can't because I don't have access to the research. And I'm somebody who's quote unquote in the field. But since
Right.
I don't have the e.edu email address anymore, I can't get access to all of this research. And man, it makes me mad.
Yeah.
and and that's just me. Now imagine the everybody else. Imagine your lawyer, your person that does work at a startup or anybody else that isn't in our direct field. How are they going to learn about what's in academia? And so that is
Absolutely.
when the creative juices start flowing.
Hmm.
And for me, I just followed my passions. And for you listening, maybe you're a really good artist. Maybe you're a fantastic photographer. I know some unbelievable photographers that are making insane impact from their photos and what they do
Yeah.
online.
Yeah.
And it might be something else. I mean, maybe this is the younger generation and you're really good at making TikTok videos.
Yeah.
Use your platform to talk about a conservation issue that you just learned about. There is
Absolutely.
so many different ways to do conservation now, and the more ways that we have out there the better, because that means more people are going to be impacted. So
Right.
if you are really good at TikTok, for example, because that's the big social media right now, then maybe once a week coming out with a really funny video that's really hilarious or something that's trending on TikTok, but it's conservation based. Guess how many more people are going to see that versus
Absolutely.
just somebody who's in the field? Because
Yeah.
there's some crazy conservation dance. I mean, like some crazy like TikTok dance, but you do it in a lion costume. And then in the
Yeah.
captions, you make a little stat about lions. How many people could that be seen that wouldn't be exposed to that conservation fact otherwise? So this is just an example of thinking outside of the box. And also too, a lot of businesses now are starting to realize that their consumer base
Right.
wants conservation options.
Right.
So that means that a lot more companies now have a whole sustainability department that it wasn't there before.
Right.
So there are a lot of other ways to get jobs for conservation that aren't in conservation. And I'm starting to
Yeah.
see this a lot now. So, yes, academia is insanely important and we need our scientists, we need our researchers, but that is just like 10% of the whole picture. Maybe not even 10%. It's like this big of the percent. and
It's
also,
like the
too,
tip of the iceberg. That's the
right.
whole thing, right? Yeah.
Right. And also on my podcast, I interview people from all backgrounds. So, for
Yeah.
example, just a couple episodes ago, I had this gal on where she and her mom founded a coffee shop that for
Wow.
conservation. So 10% of their proceeds go to Care for Wild, which is the largest rhino orphanage in South Africa. She
Wow.
volunteered there. She volunteered there. And now she wants to do so much in conservation. And I'm like, girl, we're locking arms. Guess all the crazy things you're going to do with me now because you're my girl. We're in conservation. We're doing this together. So
Right.
now she's going to be completely brought into this because she decided that she wanted to start this coffee shop to donate proceeds to help rhinos in South Africa. So like that's just an example of like I mean that's completely out of the box. Her and her mom
Wow.
started this in
Wow.
Rhino Denver, Colorado. So yeah, there's so many ways to do conservation now, and don't think it's just academia.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Like I have been like those blinders were on me for a long time until and unless I started being really disillusioned about the whole process. But like coming back to that, like have you had now this is something because since we know each other and we are comfortable speaking about this, like have you had any kind of pushbacks from this entire because whenever we have these kinds of changes coming in, like opening up, like and having these really fascinatingly attractive new ideas, there is always a part of the society or the part of the previous community or the associated community who's like, no, that's very trivial, that's very that needs to be like, that's not actual conservation. Like the academia part is like actual, like I have often had those pushbacks when I'm like changing things in my pedagogy or doing something that's associated with like bringing new things. People are sort of in they go into their purest modes of like, that's not the right way to do it. So I'm trying to know that have you had any such pushbacks from the the community that who the community that I'm talking about is that, well, that's great, but that's not part of it. That's not doing really the the muck in the boots, or like the boots in the muck, or the other way around. I might completely mess it up. But anyway, muck in the boots. All right, no. So like the doing the hard shoveling down there. So have you had any kind of those pushbacks? And I'm asking this because I'm sure students or other individuals who are listening, they have a lot of questions, apprehensions, like hesitations of doing something like what you have done right here. And they might be thinking like, what if a lot of people think that this is very trivial? This is something that's gonna be like, oh, you go to my professor, the professor is like, it's not. But what has been the overwhelming response from people whom you have reached out to? Is like, has that been like really warm, nice, or lukewarm, or
Yeah.
yeah,
If anybody isn't on board with what I'm building, then I just don't listen to them. I just don't care.
yeah,
I just don't. Like cuz what I have such a vision for what I'm building and the impact that I've made so far. I know it's working. And also
absolutely,
too, my podcast isn't built for the textbook people, like they're not my demographic. My
yeah,
demographic is people our age and younger
hmm,
and that are really want to make a change and that connect on this level. So if somebody maybe feels that way, they have not voiced it to me. And even if they did, I would probably not politely laugh in their face because like who are you to tell me what I'm doing is wrong? Like,
Yeah.
I didn't ask your opinion. But that's just me being me. Yeah, I would probably be polite. Maybe if they had like a really good point, then maybe I would listen
Yeah.
to them. But to see how much difference my podcast has made, like I said, I just hit 10,000 downloads in less than a year
Exactly. Yeah.
for a
That's
super niche podcast. Like, this is super niche. Like, I'm not
yeah.
Joe Rogan, I'm not Tim Ferriss, and this has already hit those kind of numbers. And also too, just to hear some of the comments and stuff that's been made on some social media posts, or somebody would listen like, oh my gosh, thank you so much for releasing this episode, I got so inspired in this way, shape, or form. So yeah, I think that maybe I might be putting myself in a bubble, but I'm not mad about that, because I think the people
That's
that are attracted to the podcast and the platform that I'm building, it resonates with them more anyways. So,
yeah.
and also too, I mean, I have interviewed some older people that might fit your quote unquote just standard,
Yeah.
whatever you want, the image that you see in that. And a lot of them are so happy to see something new
Yeah.
and refreshing. And then once they go through maybe an interview, or they listen to a couple episodes and they understand what it is that I'm doing, then they have a lot more respect for it. And I will
Yeah.
also say too that having a couple letters behind my name does help. Like, I can say that I have gone through all of the work.
Yeah.
Would I have as much respect if I didn't? I don't know. I don't know. And I think about that a lot. And there's sometimes I'm like, okay, well, what if I was a PhD? Does that mean that I would have even more respect in this?
No.
But how much more impact would I make? Yeah, you're just like, nah.
No. Doesn't matter.
Oh, you're so funny. But I've thought about this a lot, and I will say that maybe for my own confidence, having a couple degrees helps help me in that sense. But I don't know if that actually matters, if you know what I mean.
Mm.
So
That's
it's, yeah.
yeah. No, that's profound because I was just hoping that you would say that because I have struggled with it a lot in my career of bringing changes into the tiny little sort of restricted access that I have, and the bringing a new change or just well, it's very weird that most of our thoughts are based on that, like this great philosophical quote that nothing's permanent except change, but we are really afraid of be having change. And I'm not. I'm seeing what I'm trying to say is that it's kind of crazy to think that how people kind of sort of sit on the fence or start thinking about how to gel with the changes that are coming in. But what I'm increasingly seeing and being connected with people like you and others is that the new age of doing conservation is bold. And I think you would resonate with this pretty strongly that if we don't have, we are desperate because I think we are supremely desperate. It's so difficult to have those conflicts and not do anything about it and try anything that you can. So I have listened to a lot of the podcasts that you have done, and like every one of them so passionate and so strongly, overwhelmingly like really welcoming the idea of getting the word out there, which is I think the best uh like what would I say, that this is like the best way this medium is making a change. It's bringing the whole process together to a larger audience who, as you directly mentioned, that academia is inaccessible in a lot of ways. And I'm pretty sure that we all know what those systemic inaccessibilities are. Beyond that, the inaccessibility that we just talked about, and we are talking about people who are within that bubble, is kind of insane. That who's going to talk about those jargons if they just don't know what they are? Like if you don't bring them out there. So fantastic. So if you were to, I'm sure like you have a ton of things to tell, like my students or people who are listening. But if there are something that you might want to tell students and young aspiring conservationists, I use the word conservationist, not conservation scientists, but conservationists, what would be your, like, suggestions or those inspiring nuggets that you can tell them that they might follow so that they can think about making a change? I'm sure they all want to while listening, but how can they perceive and realize that that's like, yeah, because well, I don't know is if academia is really is crucial, is important, as you have completely established, but I don't know if that's gonna be the way in the next, or it's slowly getting outdated, and I am really conflicted about it. So
Sure you are. You're like job security, but I love seeing change. I don't know how to feel about it. Yeah.
no,
I
yeah, so yeah.
I would have to say for anybody listening, build your passion. What is it that you love more than anything? See if you can apply that to also teach about conservation in some way, shape, or form. I will say one of the biggest drivers for me to build this podcast is nobody can take it away from me. Nobody can. I was so tired of being told no. And I'm just like, what do you mean no? I've been told no more times than I've been I probably 90 to 10, like 90 to 10 ratio of times I've been told no versus time I've been told yes. And I just felt like my passion and the contribution I can make to the world was stifled by others that didn't see the value in whatever the idea was. And so I think for me, that has been one of the most powerful parts of my whole podcast, my whole conservation platform that I've built, is that no one can take it away. And I can make it exactly how I want to. And that could be for whoever is listening. You don't have to be in the confines of whatever your 9 to 5 is, whatever your current classes are. You don't have to stay within that. Yeah, you might have to turn in a paper to make a grade, but what if that lights an idea to do something that is completely outside of whatever your project is? And no one can take that away from you. Maybe you're a great artist, like I said, or you're really good at writing music, or you can write really well. Start a blog. Nobody can take a blog away from you. Just make sure you like own your .com and write whatever it is. Start social media. Well, platforms can shut down, so make sure you're kind of low diversified there when it comes to social media, but but follow whatever it is that gets you up, whatever your hobby is and that you love doing. See if there's a way that maybe you could turn that into something more, because if you already have the passion there, then there's a really good chance that you might be able to adapt it to make a bigger impact, because that's exactly what I did.
That's fantastic because I guess that's something that's really profound, because what you just mentioned about ownership and just like, you own it and nobody can take it from you. And that sort of shows when I see how passionate you are about your platform, and that is something I'm pretty sure keeps the platform going, which is, yeah, I like, as I would say that I have been part of that system, but like I've been there and I've chatted with Brooke before, and it's been like a lot. Like I would say, like I am sort of an aspiring academician. I'm not yet there, if like a lot of, like, in the standards of a lot of people, but so a lot of people have reached out to me after that podcast that we did together about lions, trying to know more about lions, and I'm like, wow, I'm pretty sure that I've written the same things in in a couple of my previous papers, but of course it didn't reach out. Now people are like, whoa, lions have come, lions are there, lions are there. And then they're like, some people are like, we didn't even know Asian lions exist. And I'm like, and that was all because you did that podcast. And that was like, yeah, so I completely can completely endorse how like strong this medium can be. And if anybody's listening and trying to figure out like how best you can shape it, uh, move forward, I would just reiterate or just reinforce what Brooke just mentioned. Do it. Follow your passion. And if you have any questions about that, I will attach like Brooke's all website links and where you can reach her. You can reach her, and I'm pretty sure she would be very happy to like answer. Before you leave, or before we sort of like wind down the chat, which I really don't want to, but because it's
I feel like
fascinating
we
to
could talk
chat.
all day. I feel like you
Yeah,
and
we can
I could
talk
just
all
go
day
all
about,
day
yeah.
long.
Yeah, so but that would be like, yeah, so I just wanted to know that I'm like, you have traveled extensively, you have met a lot of people, and you've built a lot of connections all across. And and that has completely I'm sure that has not changed, or at least uh that your outlook has evolved over the years. So if you look back to a younger Brooke, maybe 15 years before, uh, what would you be telling her? Not like whether like as a change what she should do, but what would you be telling her as being like now, like you would be telling her like, Brooke, you have no idea. Now, this is what's going to happen in the next 10 years. Or what I'm trying to say is that what are the highlights that you have, like those nuggets of, inspiration. And if we could end on that note, I'm sure a lot of people would be very inspired that you perhaps like this is a story from the African bush. This is the story from, like, as you just mentioned about Costa Rica. If you have anything that you might tell the younger Brooke, like, wait, just hold your skipping heart 10 years down the line, this is what's going to happen. You have no idea this is coming.
Oh man, you just triggered so many happy travel memories,
Go
Stotra.
on, go on.
Oh God. Well, one, I just wish I could tell that Brooke, just wait till you see the world. Just like wait till you see the world,
Wow.
baby girl. Like everything that you have dreamed about being in a super small little town, you're going to do it because you made it happen. And like I just wish that, oh my God, I kind of want to tear up right now because I wanted it so bad, Stotra. I wanted it so bad. And I had no idea how I was going to make it happen. I've been on my own since I was 18. Like my parents did everything they could, but the last thing they could have me do was see the world. So probably, um, what story do I want? I would say probably the craziest story that I've ever had was I was in the middle of a wild dog hunt in Botswana. So it was just me and my guide. And there's this pack of wild dogs. So this is in Botswana, which again, amazing country. Such such a great spot for wildlife. And we had gone out, or like, oh my gosh, wild dogs. Because, I've been a predator biologist for a long time, and I
Yeah.
understand how special it is to see wild dogs. Of course, big cats are my thing. And I
I didn't take
absolutely love
offense.
big cats.
I did not take offense.
Yes, but I
I
was
love wild dogs.
so excited at this point because
Yeah.
also, so this is a month-long trip. So I was gone for a women in conservation documentary in Tanzania, and then I was doing a scouting trip for my job at the time with NatHab. And I ended my trip in Botswana. So by this point, I'd already seen cheetah, lion, and leopard, and which of course I was like, seeing all these pets, and then finally got to see wild dogs. So we tracked these wild dogs down, and it was really hot. I was there during the hot season. And so this like October. So yeah,
Mm,
starting to get really
mm,
hot and dry. Blah, really,
mm.
I was sweating a lot. And the dogs were super lethargic. They're just like laying around, ma, ma, ma. And we found them. So we drive up, and in Botswana, we were on private reserves. And so when you're on
Mm.
private reserves, you can go off trail. So we
Right.
actually like drove up to this little group, this little pack, and they had 14 puppies. And
Oh.
all of these puppies are just like around us. And
Mm.
I have all of these videos. I can totally send you some if you just want to
Oh,
be
I would
super
love to.
jealous of my
As if I'm not already.
yeah. Yeah, so we're just like in this pack and they don't care. I mean, they know that these the guide vehicles aren't going to hurt them in any way. So they're super relaxed, super chill. They're all sleeping. They're like coming underneath the truck and falling asleep and making all of their vocalizations and all their behaviors,
Yeah.
which is super cool to see. And then the other half of adults come back. And so there's the big greeting, which I'm sure anybody has seen on any nature documentary, when the adults come back and they all like, chomping at their
Yeah.
mouth, trying to get food. They're super excited. All the dogs are going crazy. And then all of them, the alpha female, she perks up and they all start to walk in a certain direction. And my guide's like, here we go. It's on. They're going on a hunt. And so we follow them, and first we followed the puppies because there's a couple adults that stayed with the puppies and all the rest of the pack went to hunt. And for the next 2 hours we were with these dogs, and they were relentless. They kept chasing stuff until they brought something down. And oh my gosh, it was the wildest thing of all time. We couldn't keep up because the dogs are going in and out of the
Of
bush, they're
course.
following
Yeah.
all around. And then at the very last moment, right as the sun set, they brought down an impala, and
Wow.
we were right there. We watched the whole thing. They
Oh, I'm
devoured
getting
it.
goosebumps.
Oh my god, they devoured it like super
Yeah.
fast. And what was even funnier is my guide, because this particular impala was missing one of his horns, and so they're like,
Yeah.
oh man, I liked that guy. As he's
Oh.
currently being devoured by a pack of wild dogs. And then some of the adults stopped eating and brought the puppies. So then I have
Mm.
videos and footage of these puppies like springing through all of these grasslands to come eat what's
Oh.
left of the impala. So I will say
Oh.
one, it was amazing to see a hunt. And then two, that it was with a thriving wild dog pack. Like it was
Wow.
just like all of those conservation feels all at
Yeah.
once. It was like a highlight of my life,
Wow.
hands down.
Well, well, I would just say that it just the passion it just shows, and I got goosebumps listening to the stories that you just had to mention, and I just want to say to anybody listening that what Brooke just mentioned is that like to a younger Brooke that wait to see what the world is and how beautiful it is. And I am so glad, Brooke, that you said that you really wanted this. You really worked so hard. You wanted so hard for this. And that shows. And I would just say to anybody watching that if you're really passionate about it, do it. Because there's so many ways to do conservation that it would be a disservice to the planet if you start wearing those blinders, or if anybody asks you to do so. And I'm pretty confident that that's what Brooke has broken those shackles and removed those blinders and seeing the world in those funky glasses that rewild that logo of that the cat on the wheel. So
Those
I
big
guess
glasses.
yeah, those are those that's remove your blinders, wear those funky glasses because that's what conservation right now looks like. So yeah, I guess with that I would say that thank you, Brooke, for being so insightful and being so amazing, and I hope you all the force so that you can keep going and do this inspiring thing and do and make the impacts that you are making. And I must say that I am very fortunate and very proud that I can even think about, like, I can call myself that, yeah, I know Brooke Mitchell Norman, right? So, and I can text her and she would respond to that text sometime for sure. So I'm so
100%.
I'm so lucky for that. So thank you so much.
Hey, thanks again for listening to this episode of Rewildology. If you like what you heard, hit that subscribe button to never miss a future episode. Do you have a cool environmental organization, travel story, or research that you'd like to share? Let me know at rewildology.com. Until next time, friends, together we will rewild the planet.